What's up, patrons, and welcome back. This is Zadi from Tidos International, and we have another Patreon interview coming in. This is actually your interview for November. I apologize, but I was a little bit delayed after the Football Content Awards, and we have a great interview here for you today. Actually, I had the pleasure of meeting Alex Barker here from The Athletic at the award show. Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very good, thank you. Yeah, it's been a couple of weeks since that award show. That was a really good night. So it's good to see you again, this time virtually, of course. But yeah, lovely to be
Exactly. Yeah,
here.
the stadium was also incredible. We told everybody being inside the facility, such a new facility too. Even though I'm an Arsenal fan, it was incredible to see that stadium and everything that's in there. Such a new stadium. But guys, Alex actually was at the Football Content Awards and he accepted two awards, I believe, two first place awards on behalf of the Athletic for the great work that's done over there, including the work that Alex does himself. And Alex actually he follows French football. It's a bit of a hobby of his, and he covers the Premier League as well. And as we always get started with our guests, Alex, tell us a little bit about your background in football, kind of how you grew up with it, and then how that transitioned to you becoming a writer for The Athletic.
Oh, good question. I think the best place to start really is like 2020, I want to say, just at the beginning of that year. I'd always been interested in football, but it was nowhere near a career at that point. And then I dropped out of university a couple of years beforehand. I didn't really know where to take my life. And then at the beginning of 2020, I'd been consuming a lot of football content over the past year, just for fun. And I kind of looked inwards and thought, yeah, this is if I could get a dream job, it would be doing stuff on football. So let's work towards that. And I won't go through every single step, but where French football comes in is that after about 3 to 4 months of just doing tweets on my own account about the Premier League, I realized that basically everybody wants to do that, and I kind of found it a bit boring anyway. So I wanted to stand out, and I thought, well, the Bundesliga, there's a lot of German football coverage in the UK. La Liga, you've got Real Madrid and Barcelona, that they're always going to be covered. Serie A has quite a big history in England as well, with uh, Serie A football in the 90s on television. So it kind of left me thinking, well, Liga, and that's a top 5 league, and no one really talks about it. So let me cover that. Let me have a look at that and try and get into it. And that has been, I think, quite a core part of my, I guess, journey towards the Athletic. I think that's helped me build a platform, the title Euro Expert on Twitter and TikTok. And I guess, like, if I could pick like one flashpoint, like one thing I always think about that was a key step for my journey was at the beginning of 2021, I've been following Liga for the past year, been following PSG very closely, and Thomas Tuchel moves to Chelsea. And
Right.
I remember all the publishers covering him and saying, "Oh, he did this at Borussia Dortmund." And it's very clear that nobody at the Athletic, at the Guardian, BBC, or anyone had been following his PSG. Whereas I had, and within about 2 days, I was getting a ton of requests from like Chelsea channels to have me on and talk about his PSG team. I think that was a big moment for me to go, yeah, giving attention to teams that aren't the big 6 Premier League ones. That is where the interesting stuff is. That's where it often is more fun, and in the end, it will pay off.
And it definitely seems like it has. You these days, when it comes to content, you really have to find niches, right? You kind of have to find niches that are unexplored. Maybe we can recruit you as if Olympiacos continues to do well and the Greek league continues to improve. Maybe we can get you into some Greek league coverage for the Athletic. But the journey is absolutely fantastic. We love to hear how people get involved in, especially when in their careers that surround football. Now, as somebody that has that covers, of course, the Premier League and then of course the French league, as you brought up, I do want to ask you a question about your opinions on the emergence of not just Nottingham Forest, but President Evangelos Marinakis and his ascension for Forest into the Premier League. We've seen a lot of different opinions on him. He's not a typical owner as you would come to expect in the English sense, I would say. So, my first question for you is when you saw Nottingham Forest come in, and now you've been immersed into the world of Marinakis, the drama that surrounds Marinakis, not just from Nottingham Forest, but what comes from Greece. How do you see this? And what was your opinion of it as it was happening a couple of years ago?
Yeah, I think it's important to make clear. Like you asked me right now what my opinion was beforehand. My opinion's definitely changed because
Mhm.
I think even if you ask me, even if you asked me in the summer, I had Nottingham Forest to be relegated because I just didn't particularly rate what he was doing when he came in. I was one of the people saying like this is far too many players being brought in, and not all of them are good as well. Like I get mixed up with the players that Nottingham Forest have signed because a lot of them didn't make sense, and it was very weird. Um, but I guess like my attitude towards it started to change a bit because I'd done quite a big research project into how to stay in the Premier League. Basically, the data that are behind teams that get promoted and what what marks the ones out who stay up and do well, and what marks the ones out who get relegated. And one of the big conclusions I found from that was you need to spend money. You need to spend as much money as
Of
possible.
course.
You need to get your squad Premier League football, and you shouldn't really like playing possession-based football, attractive football. That's not a priority when getting promoted. Most teams who try to do that, the top ones, the ones who do it really well, like Swansea City, Leeds United, controlling a lot of the ball as well. They stay up because they're great, but a lot of the teams who try, I think we're looking at Southampton this season, last season Burnley, they often fail. So I also kind of appreciated that Forest went for Nuno after Steve Cooper because they're going for that more uh, pragmatic guy.
Right.
But I mean, I'm sure we'll get more into what I think about it now. But what I'll say for your actual question is, yeah, when he arrived and the first year or so of Marinakis and Nottingham Forest, I was like, this isn't lasting, and they were in my tip to be relegated last summer.
Well, listen, I'm not necessarily in disagreement with you. I think as Olympiacos fans, we actually had a similar outlook. And because we were kind of going through similar things as Forrest in the last couple of years, in terms of the way that he was doing transfers and the way that the approach was, at least, right? Because like Forrest, in the past couple of seasons before this one, at least, we were bringing in too many players.
Hmm.
And I mean, we were changing 30, 40 players a summer. It was really bad. 30 in, 30 out. Even this summer, while we didn't bring as many in, we still had to get rid of 36 players. So the watching kind of it has been a little bit of an evolution now since he got Forest to the Premier League. The way the multi-club model he thought would work was really just Olympiacos would send Forest their junk, Forest would send Olympiacos their junk. We would just buy a whole bunch of players and hope to God it worked for the best. There wasn't really like a concrete strategy. It felt in many ways like agent led transactions, not something that was built. And then in time, we have seen kind of a pivot from that to the point where we are now, where he has purchased another club, Rio Ave. He's now purchasing Vasco da Gama in Brazil. And Edu Gaspar from Arsenal, the sporting director, is going to be kind of leading this global network with former Roma CEO and former general director of Olympiacos as his right hand, Lina Suluku. So you said your opinion has changed. Having seen kind of how he's beginning to transition and change how he manages things, now what is your opinion about it?
I guess it's interesting to hear you speak about the Olympiacos have been going through similar problems and that you've sensed a change in the way things have been ran. But my opinion changed not necessarily from obviously it's going to be informed by the fact that Olympiacos recently won the Conference League, Nottingham Forest stayed up again, and now they're flying really high in the Premier League. Like it's going to be influenced by that. But it's about a month ago, I just got to step back. No, I was talking actually with a friend, John McKenzie, when we were chatting about Nottingham Forest and how they're doing so well. And I was just looking at their squad, and I was like, actually, all that money that was spent, it seems to have paid off because I look at their team in basically every position, I think, yeah, this is a Premier League side. Like their centre backs, Murillo and Milenkovic, like these are very good Premier League players.
Right. Amazing
Like
additions.
yeah, Chris Wood up front, solid Premier League player. You've got Awaniyi behind him. Elliot Anderson, that's like a masterstroke of a signing. Morgan Gibbs White as well, while the early bias is paying off. And it just kind of made me step back and realize, yeah, this what I was talking about before. Really, if I'm thinking about the plan I came up with to stay in the Premier League, which was be pragmatic, spend money, get your squad to a Premier League level, he has really followed that to a T. And that team is, I mean, I don't think Nottingham Forest at all. Now that next season, I'm not going to be saying they're going to get relegated because they're in a very good spot. So
Right.
yeah, my opinion changed more from just stepping back and thinking, actually, they have done quite a good job. And I guess it's like the Chelsea effect, right? You spend loads of money. It's not particularly nice to see big squad turnover, big squad churn. It feels a bit like too modern football, right? You want to see a group of players stick together. But I mean, it's been a success, and I can't argue with that.
Right, and the success followed the other teams because as we said, Forest is not only staying up, they've actually been in the top, we'll say the top third of the table up to this point, even though they had the big loss against Arsenal, which I got to see in person, and and then, another loss recently. But when it comes to the success he's had at Forest and Olympiacos, he just won the youth league with the Olympiacos with the academy, and then the Conference League, the first ever Greek team to win any European title. So the successes are kind of starting to build on each other within the network. Now, what in your opinion, what would be the next step for them to become not just okay, they are regulars in the Premier League fighting for like a bottom spot in the top, say 7 or 8 teams. What's the next step he has to take to become a contender for the top four?
Oh, it's a good question. I think it all comes down to what you were talking about before, and it's a wider thing with Forest. It's about how you manage the multi-club project. I find it interesting because in Olympiacos, like you've got, I mean, I'm sure there's Olympiacos fans who feel that they should be the primary club, right, in a multi-club
Oh,
structure, and
absolutely.
yeah, Forest, if anything, should be the feeder. Forest are a recently promoted Premier League team. Sure, it's the Premier League, but Olympiacos is a massive club that has recently won silverware. Why can't you divert the resources there? And that's what separates them for me. Than like a good example would be Manchester City, right? They've got investments in clubs all over the world, but really it's all coming back to Manchester City. Same with the Red Bull network. You've got investments in Brazil, in the US, in Austria. It's going to come eventually to RB Leipzig, where they play Bundesliga and then they get sold for the most money. So I'm very interested to see how he manages that, and I think that'll be the crucial thing of whether Olympiacos sustain their success and Nottingham Forest end up building a squad that becomes like you said, challenger for the top four. I imagine the other two clubs you mentioned, Vasco da Gama and Rio Ave, they'll have to become the primary feeders for this, and it's about managing those expectations. In France, for example, I follow Strasbourg quite closely. They're having a really good season now. Obviously, Chelsea owned, Blueco owned rather. But despite their success, they've been like a top 8-ish side, I'd say. The fans are still fuming. The fans are not happy with how they're being run because they are a feeder club for Chelsea, and that's going to be an interesting thing to manage. And I guess I'd round off this point by saying, you could nail this multi-club strategy and see Forest go to new heights. You can see Olympiacos sustain the success, or you could be like, I think it's the Pozzos in charge of Watford and Udinese and a couple other teams, and Watford relegated from the Premier League. Udinese, they've kind of been stagnating in Serie A. So yeah, it's that will be core to how all of these teams, how all these teams perform. It's nailing that multi-club strategy.
Yeah, and the success, right? Kind of in the US, we kind of have a saying that winning cures all. So as long as both sides, from the Olympiacos end, as long as Olympiacos is winning and continuing to compete in Europe, the fans will be more or less placated. And that could go the same for Forest. As long as Forest is continuing to do well in the Premier League and show that they can compete in those top spots, the Forest fans won't feel like they're being used to make deals for Olympiacos because These are things that have been done, right? We saw that Forest was used as a vehicle for the deal for David Carmo, a 10 million pound deal for a defender that won the Conference League with Olympiacos. And it has been the vehicle has been kind of set up so that there's no financial impact on Forest as far as like the PSR rules are concerned. But it's still, fans can look at that and say what we're being used to support his favorite club, Olympiacos. Then from the Greek end, there, the way things are now, the way are because Greek league revenues are far less than what the Premier League has. The team that finishes last in the Premier League wins more money than Olympiacos would get from its Greek league revenues in 5 years, more
Wow.
than 5 years. Sorry. So that's, the Olympiacos gets their TV deal is 18.5 million a season, which ends, and then there's a new deal coming. But that was the biggest deal a Greek league team had ever seen for the league. So think about it. I think the lowest team in the Premier League gets at least 115 million pounds, right? Is that 115
Yeah,
to
around
120
that
million?
mark.
Right. And that's not even factoring in like other sponsorships. That's just your guaranteed revenue if you finish last place. Olympiacos wouldn't see that, 6 years. It would take almost 6 years for them to see that money just from their media deal. So in a way, unless something changes with the media deals and the money, the revenue they make, there's going to be a cap that Olympiacos can hit without making sales and things like that. So Forest would have to be used if success is wanted for Olympiacos' end to make some of these things happen, like getting David Carmo, maybe Gustavo Scarpa as an example of a
Mhm.
deal, but that was intended for Olympiacos. Then, of course, things happened and he ended up staying at Forest. But this is something that, as long as everybody's winning, everybody's happy with. But the second there's some struggles, everybody gets upset. So there's always the question of priority. How could this happen? Now, shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to kind of talk to you about the way Marinakis has entered Greece, the way he and his personality have kind of changed things, because he doesn't act like a normal owner in the UK, which we've heard plenty of times. For us, it's different. We see what happens in Greece. If you see the environment in the Greek league, it explains 100% how he is the way he is. But how has the way he has presented himself, the way Forrest can act sometimes with officiating, how has that personality, that gravitas, how has that impacted, we'll say, in your opinion, the atmosphere of English sports? Him coming in, being a little bit more, I don't want to say I'm bombastic, but a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more. He tells it like it is, how he says it. He doesn't pull any punches in that respect when he's talking about things he does or doesn't like. How has that kind of changed things within England? Has that changed what's acceptable for owners to do, or has it kind of shown like, no, we don't want this, and they penalize them over and over again?
Um, I guess like there's two answers to this. I think the football ownership in the Premier League is a bit interesting at the moment. Like, there's some good work on by my colleagues who on this recently that pointed out like the Premier League is becoming more and more US led, and US
Right.
owners tend to be a bit more let's hire the experts and put them in charge. It's a lot more detached, I think. So like personally, I'm a big fan of like I'd love more owners like Marinakis who are more hands on, who get more involved, and just are more fun than an American businessman who, yeah, sure, they, even if they're like Liverpool's owner, John W. Henry, like sure, he clearly wants Liverpool to succeed. It's not necessarily just profits for him, but you rarely ever see him. It's bring in the sporting director, CEO, whoever in charge, and get them to run the club. I enjoy having an owner who's a bit more, yeah, a bit more chaotic. And like you said, I've been a couple of years since I've watched more Greek league. I mean, I think what drew me out of it in the end was just it's so chaotic, controversial. It's hard to gain
Oh yeah.
much in terms of football from it. Um, but yeah, I think it's had an impact definitely on the Premier League. Like Marinakis is definitely someone who like. everyone knows and everyone kind of maybe treats Forest as sort of like, I don't know, the naughty boys in the Premier League, especially early in the season with them booing the Premier League anthem and like the complaints about the
Right.
refs. Yeah, it's definitely an impact, but like personally, I'm a big fan of it. I wish more owners were like Marinakis because it's just more fun and makes for a more entertaining product.
Well, and the thing with him is, and I believe he explained this when he first bought Forest in the championship. He's not he is a super fan. He is an Olympiacos super fan. He grew up with Olympiacos. He loves Olympiacos. It's his heart, it's his passion. He went to boarding school in Nottingham, so that's where his love for the area came from, and that's why he bought Forest, was because he has such a passion for that area. He grew up there, and he grew up supporting Nottingham Forest, that he wanted to not only take it over but change the culture, the mentality of the whole town and organization regarding football to win, because that's what he wants. When you're at Olympiacos, the expectation is to win. Anything besides that is a disappointment. So going into a place like Forest, which they would be happy at times with draws, especially if it was a difficult game. He said, no, 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 this changes. And he changes that because he's a super fan first, which is weird. You do not see, especially in the United States, that's not a thing. Like in almost any of our sports culture here, like the owners are just, they're there, they enjoy themselves, but that's it. It's a business. And that's how most of them treat it. There's not a whole lot of super fans that are owners, that are there because they just want to win and they have a passion for the game. Marinakis in particular is a super fan. He wants to win, and that's what he cares about more than anything else. Less so the profit part. He has way more profitable businesses that make more profit faster for him than football. He's here because he wants to win and he wants to dominate the sport. That's it.
Yeah.
So I could see exactly what you're saying there. And that mentality, is that something like that has to win, that diehard mentality? Is that something that English sports have seen in the last, I don't, I would say since the 2000s?
Yeah, not really, I'd say. I mean, like, it's interesting. I kind of, when I think of Varanakis in a weird way, I think of Abramovich, just in that sort of,
Right.
like, he's bought a team and it's just about wanting to have fun and win games. But Abramovich was so quiet and you obviously never heard from him.
Right.
And that's why I do struggle to think of someone like Marinakis. And to be honest, in like a wider European football landscape, what you're talking about super fan owners, they are definitely on the way out. I think a good note comparison would be John Michel Aulas at Lyon. I'm not sure if he ever grew up being a fan, but when he took over, I think when he took over, it was a financially driven decision. But he grew to love that club and grew to demand success from it, which meant his final decade in charge of Lyon was quite painful because he was struggling to keep up with peers. He wasn't running the club as well. Leon was starting to fall off, and it did kind of feel like maybe a more someone with better business acumen in charge would fix Leon's problems to an extent. Um, but yeah, I struggle right. I honestly struggle right now to think of across wider European football that super fan owner. I don't really think there is few of them.
And it does
Actually,
kind of,
I tell a lie. Brighton, Tony Bloom. Tony Bloom, massive
that's
fan
right.
of Brighton. There we go.
I couldn't think, I was thinking myself too, and I completely forgot because I was reading about him actually 2 weeks ago, while I was in the UK, and I completely forgot about that. But it does kind of have sometimes like its negatives, right? Because if he's unhappy and things aren't going well, he'll fire the whole staff and hire new players in and out. He's done it at Olympiacos, and he's not afraid to do it at Forest either. And football is not like other businesses where, yeah, you can cut your losses, change everything, and move. It's a living thing. These teams are living beings, right? And sometimes you have to have patience for things to work out. So it does kind of have both its pros and cons. Now, for you, and this is probably a difficult question, in that respect, do you think it's better to have an owner that is more patient and willing to let things work, or is it better to have an owner that's, cuts it if it's not working and then tries something else?
I think it depends on where the club is. I think a reason why Marinakis has been successful at Forest and Olympiacos. I mean, like you'd know way more than me, obviously, on Olympiacos, but from an outsider's perspective, just like obviously his financial might over the rest of that league must be enormous. So I think even if he makes mistakes there in the Greek league, he's going to get success at some point because I mean Olympiacos are a massive club anyway, and with Forest, they were at such a low that he could afford to keep churning through mistakes and in the championship because it did take him a little time to get promoted. He could
Right.
afford to churn through mistakes and then it will work out. I think where he'd struggle more if it was like a um, if he was if he was at a club that were more mid-table in the Premier League, and he was trying to take them into the top 6, and that at the point where you're having to compete with people who are, groups of patient business people in charge of teams like City and Chelsea and Liverpool, when you're competing with them and you're making more emotionally charged decisions, that's when I think there's a potential for like you sack your staff actually has a negative effect and then you start falling down the league and it creates more of a toxic atmosphere. But when he's already like Forest, he takes over in a toxic atmosphere at a club that isn't going anywhere. It's hard to make that club more toxic, right?
Right. Yeah. That's actually a really good point. I didn't think about it like that. That's a very good point to make. Now shifting gears a little bit because I do want your opinion, especially as somebody that doesn't see from the inside, from the Greek perspective, getting that outside perspective, somebody that sees more of what happens in the bigger leagues, including France. How do you see the impact of the Conference League for Olympiacos we're talking about? They've won the first ever Greek title. It's the Conference League, so of course it's not the Europa League, not the Champions League, the Conference League. But how has that win turned heads for not just a club like Olympiacos, but for Greek teams in general?
It's interesting. I think it has turned heads, and I reckon it has made an impact in European football. I'm not necessarily sure it would have made an impact necessarily on like Greek football specifically, but I think what Olympiacos winning the UEFA Conference League proves is in that competition, it's a nice blend. I really like the competition, by the way. It's a nice blend of this is a prestigious tournament. It's worth winning. Chelsea are probably going to demolish it this year, and that'll be a good name to add onto the list of winners. I actually live near West Ham's training ground, so I was very much a part of the atmosphere when they won it beforehand. But the point I make is it's a prestigious trophy, but Olympiacos winning it shows that teams from outside the top 5 leagues, they have a realistic chance of gaining silverware of putting players into the spotlight, right? So I think what that win has made an impact on is I'm not like I said, I'm not noticed like a renewed focus on Greek football necessarily, but more a feeling of okay, if you're a aspiring youngster, for example, or you're maybe a player in your mid 20s and not quite Premier League level, but you're a decent level. If you have a choice between going to a mid-table Serie A club or going to a team like a Olympiacos, maybe a Dinamo Zagreb in Croatia, for example, another like really good team in a weaker league, or like I don't know, a Club Brugge in Belgium, going to a team who, sure, they're not like the league is weaker, but if you're going to be competing in the Conference League or in the Europa League, for example, you have a realistic chance of helping your team do well in those top competitions, then that helps inflate your price tag, helps inflate your chances of then instead of going to what we spoke about a minute ago, a mid-table Serie A club, you could go to a top-level club, right? So I think
Right.
it's heightened, it's made the route outside of a top 5 European league more appealing to players looking to boost their reputation.
And we did see some of that, right? Like I know, of course, when Olympiacos won, just for in terms of what the channel did, there was way more exposure, more not just English outlets, but from all these other countries, they wanted more information about Olympiacos. We partner with One Football now. They didn't really care about Olympiacos before, and then now they said, "Look, we need to have some dedicated coverage for Olympiacos. This is a big team. They're a European champion." And even when it came to attracting players, we did. Like, look, we attracted Willian. Some of that was, due to the relationship between Kia and Marinakis, but we got Willian. We've brought in players like Marcelo James Rodriguez in the past. We brought Christopher Veld, who had a great season in Poland. Attracting some players was after the Conference League seemed to be what we expected, attracting some decent caliber players. But what we personally had a little bit of a disappointment with was we expected that the Conference League win would materialize maybe more offers for the players that we had for
Mm,
sales. Now, there is nuance because we had a lot of players that were loaned. So we had to renew them, get new deals for them, which is okay. It is what it is. You're not going to usually sell them right after the fact. But of the sellable assets we had, we really didn't see a lot of serious offers, which we kind of were disappointed with. You know, in a way, like, okay, you're happy that you keep more of those pieces from the championship winning side, right? But at the same time, when you don't see the offers, you wonder, well, wait a minute, is there really any value in that respect to the Conference League? Because look, we won the Conference League, but then nobody wanted any of these players. So
mm.
my question to you then is that context considered, would winning the Europa League be much more beneficial in that aspect because it's a bigger tournament than winning the Conference League?
I mean, yes, but I mean, it's interesting context you've added. I think I'd be interested to know like, the age of Olympiakos' squad because from what I've seen, I tend to try and keep track of these sort of things. And from what I've seen in the past, isn't it quite a? Was it last season like a relatively older squad or like experienced squad? And like, better question: were there any? There weren't any like wonder kids that I knew of last season who like powered that Olympiakos win to the Conference League, were there?
No.
That's
No,
prob
I think the average age was like definitely by Conference League standards, it was probably a little older. It was closer to 28 versus
oh, yeah.
now, we're the youngest in Greece. We're probably like mid closer to the younger side in the Europa League. We have two 17-year-olds that are basically day in, day out starters. But yeah, that wasn't the case last year.
Yeah, that I think that would be the big reason. Like, I was looking at your squad earlier, actually, and one player you didn't mention, I mean, it'd be funny if you tell me now he's doing rubbish, but one player who did catch my eye was Yusuf Yazici, formerly of Lille, because he's always been a fun player of mine. He
Yeah.
won the title of Lille in 2021. I think him going to Olympiacos shows that, yeah, winning the Conference League, that's made an impact. I wonder if he would have gone there if you hadn't won that competition. So yeah, sure, winning the Europa League's always going to be a bigger boost to the credentials, but I still think winning the Conference League or just doing well in the Conference League, finishing high, is like a good marker. Like for example, another great example, Vincenzo Italiano at Fiorentina. He's
Right.
kind of been a bit weak in the league recently, but he reached two finals. And
Right.
then he ended up getting the Bologna job, who were in the Champions League. He might not have got that job had he not done so well in the Conference League, right? So I definitely
Yep.
think it makes an impact.
Now, another thing that kind of comes from that too is, Ayub El-Kabi. He broke a record for goals in a knockout tournament, a UEFA knockout tournament. In 2024, he has the most European goals in UEFA competitions altogether. That's for Europa League and Conference League. In his career since joining Olympiacos, he has already 19 goal contributions this year. He had 36 goal contributions last year, and only 10 of those came in the first half of the season. So since January, Ayub El-Kabi has uh, 45 goal contributions in all competitions,
Wow.
and yet he does not get a Ballon d'Or nod. I don't expect him ever to be on the top, but at least on the list, there were some players that had one or two good games all season, all year, and they were on that list. And this guy wins the Conference League, sets a UEFA record, and he has an absurd goal contribution tally, and he doesn't even get a nod. So, one, my question to you is: did El Kabi deserve at least a nod somewhere on the list? And two, does the fact that he did that in the Conference League also maybe some individuals or whoever, whatever, I think it's writers, or is it writers that do the nominations for
Mm.
Ballon d'Or? Does that, because he did it in the lower competition, does it maybe make them think, all right, it was Conference League, who cares?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, actually. I think it is. I imagine it wasn't a case of writers saying it's Conference League, who cares? It's probably maybe again like El Kabi's quite an older player, right? Like
30.
I
Yeah.
yeah, I imagine it's like there just wasn't that lack of, the Ballon d'Or is as much PR as it is based on quality, and he just didn't have
Right.
that PR. But I think you're absolutely right. It's a very valid point to make. I chuckled at first, but yeah, like he should be. He's won set a record in a UEFA competition and won it. Like he should have. He shouldn't be top 10 or anything, but he should be on that 30, 50 man shortlist.
Right.
Absolutely, I think that's absolutely fair.
That's all I wanted to hear. I just wanted somebody to agree with me on that, because when we saw the Ballon d'Or list, like that was the first thing everybody in Greece and all Greek spaces said, not just Olympiacos but other teams were like, how in God's name does El Kabi not even get on the lower end of the list with everything that he's done? And so that again brought questions about, well, what did the conference league actually mean anything? Because if he had done that, if he does it and we do well in the Europa League, maybe he'll be more likely to get on the list. So that's kind of where that question comes. Now, Alex, I've had you here for over 35 minutes. I just have a couple more questions for you. I don't want to keep you too much longer. But my question for you was, again, as somebody who is looking from the outside in and whose experiences in leagues that are much bigger than Greece, we'll say, how do you see with the way that things have transitioned with UEFA competitions? Right now, as it stands, those wild card places that are in place for the top teams with the coefficients could go directly to Olympiacos if we continue and we win the league. We could get that direct seat into the Champions League. So, my question for you is, the way things have changed, how do you see this impacting leagues? We'll say leagues that are outside the top five. Do you think that this system could give more benefit to the lower leagues? Or do you think in the end this is just another way for things to consolidate around the biggest clubs and push revenues from what the bigger clubs do?
I think it's a bit of both, but from the start, I've been a fan of this Champions League reformatting. I mean, I've really enjoyed it this year, and even looking at it on paper, what it ended up doing was just giving more spaces away. Right, there wasn't even the
Right.
wild cards. I mean, like I said, I'm a big French football fan. It gave like this sometimes gets forgotten, but France only had 3 Champions League spots despite being
Right.
this in a top 5 league. So always had this disadvantage, sorry, compared to the top 4 leagues. So that evened it up. And I mean, another team I do a lot of coverage on is Celtic. I work with a Patreon called 20 Minute Tims, and they're having the time of their lives, and they like the fans. And Celtic could feasibly get into the Champions League round of 16. So even just beyond giving the opportunities to qualify, I think this new format's been great because it's allowing teams like if Olympiacos do get in next season, they're the sort of team that could cause like considerable problems. And if they pick up 10, 12 points, that might be enough to get into the playoff. And then if you win the playoff round of 16. So I think this whole reformat is excellent. I think yes, it's going to give more money to the big teams. But at the same time, those big teams need to perform. And PSG look like they're going to go out. Real Madrid look like they're going to really struggle to go through. So at the end of the day, I think it's been great.
I agree. I was not a huge fan at first with the inception, because in a way it kind of just felt like we were seeing Super League, but UEFA's version of it. But as we're living it, I am enjoying every second of it. First of all, I love playing different teams every week. I hated being stuck in a group, especially when it was a 3 teams. You're like, great, this is going to be a pain in the butt every game. It's going to be super difficult. And, you're lucky if you win one game. I love that we're playing. Okay, we have our difficult matches, which for us have been actually the easier teams, technically. The lower block teams have given us more problems, and we're doing better against the better teams. So, but I really love this format. And I have one more question for you, Alex, before a couple of quick fire questions I have. And my final question for you is, in your opinion, as someone not just who writes for The Athletic, but as someone who also has seen so much of the top leagues, what does it take? What do you think it would take for a non-top 10 league even to try and break in to that top 10 position? What does it take for them to try and match revenues? What does it take for them to try and to be able to do that?
Well, that's a good question.
I asked this to everybody, by the way, and it's not an easy question, but the opinions and the ideas are always fantastic. So anything that comes to mind for that is always appreciated.
Well, the route to go down would be I mean, the only measurable way we have to rank the top leagues is UEFA's coefficient, which is, in my opinion, a very flawed system. I don't appreciate this aspect of UEFA's system, but nevertheless, what you would need is your league to do well in European football. So honestly, I think there's the best way to do it isn't necessarily making your league better; it's making your best teams better. I think the Eredivisie has been a shining example of this. Like, they've always been a top 10 league, but recently they were right on the precipice of becoming a top 5 league. And the bottom of the Eredivisie's quality never changed. Like, it was only a couple of seasons ago that Ajax beat VV Venlo, or Triple V Venlo, I think they are, like 13-0. But what the Eredivisie had that dragged the league up the coefficients was PSV, AZ Alkmaar, or AZ rather, Ajax and Feyenoord all doing well in Europe. And those teams in Europe dragged up the coefficient and brought in the money. And I guess the idea is trickle down economics. That money eventually trickles down. So I
Right.
think like my first answer would be like you just find a way of propelling your top teams and platforming them well to do in Europe. The other angle I think is you could learn a lot from what I think Denmark are doing, where they've a lot of their teams have put quite a bit of emphasis on um, like youth scouting, Nordjylland being one, like a lot of scouting across Africa. And I think the idea there would just be like you just make your youth development top tier, and maybe that will eventually platform all of your clubs to a slightly better level. But if you're asking me, like, I'm going to pay you for the next 10 years to be in charge of this league, and your idea is to get us from the 15th best league to the top 5 best league, I go down my first option and just work on making my best teams the best.
So that's a very unique answer. No one has given that kind of answer before, which is like, listen, take the top teams and make sure they're competing in Europe, and then the rest will come because more people want to watch what's going on domestically. That's a very unique answer, and I really like that. Definitely going to clip that one. That's going to go up on socials. That's a very good answer. I like it. So, Alex, real quick, as we do with every guest, we have a quick fire round. It's just 5 questions, very fast, whatever comes to the top of your head. And the first question is, what is your favorite food?
Oh, favorite food? Born biscuits.
Oh, see, I got to get a little bit of the British cuisine when I was there last week, and I fell in love with blood pudding. I had blood cake even with the fried egg on top. So ham and pea soup, I loved all of it. It was fantastic. I even enjoyed the joke about Welsh rabbit and Scottish rabbit too. I enjoyed that as well. So, what is your favorite movie and show,
Favorite. God,
or both? Favorite movie and show.
Oh, excellent. Daredevil.
Oh,
In,
fantastic show.
instant. Yeah.
And what about movie?
That becomes trickier. Daredevil's my favorite piece of media, so it's very hard to pick movie, but I'll pick one. Goodness me, that is actually really difficult. Oh goodness me, I don't know my favorite movie off the top of my head. I don't want to pick a Marvel one to come across too basic. Favorite movie at the moment. Favorite movie at the moment would be American Psycho. Rewatched that recently. It's very, very good.
That's a very good one. Very good one. Favorite vacation spot?
That would be Menorca, Spanish island.
Oh, very nice. Favorite football related memory?
Good question. Uh, I'd probably go a very vain one, and it would be an overhead kick I scored within 30 seconds of meeting new teammates on a five-a-side team.
Wow. See, you're now only the second person. The last person I interviewed, it was a personal experience of theirs. Normally, everyone picks like a game they went to or like something, that they witnessed. So now, ever since I did the last interview, now it seems everybody, it's their personal experience. It's so funny how that works out. And the last one is, if money was not a problem, where would you go?
Ooh, money not a problem. Where would I go? I would go to New York City.
New York City. You're the
I
first
imagine it's
person to bring up a place in the United States. No
I
one
imagine
has
it's the
ever.
worst place ever. It's way worse than I imagined. But I've never been to the US, and New York is my dream holiday destination. So there you are.
It is a cityscape. Look, I'll give you that. If you love concrete jungles, it's insanity. So many things to see, I promise you that. And different, it's like you can go to a different type of culture in every corner. So that I think you would enjoy. So New York City, that is definitely a first. Well, Alex, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Really quickly before we close up here, tell everybody where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter and on Blue Sky, sorry, X and Blue Sky, at EuroExpert / Alexander Barker. You can also find me on TikTok at that same handle. But most of the time, you can find me at The Athletic FC on YouTube and other social platforms where I hopefully regularly upload videos, and you can find me there.
Fantastic. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. And guys, stay tuned for the next Patreon thing we are doing. We have Martial, our favorite Frenchman. He is going to be pronouncing the weirdest English words we can find. That'll be one of your holiday Patreon episodes. So check that out. That'll be coming to you shortly. But in the meantime, hope you enjoyed this interview. There's some great bits from Alex here. Great discussion. And we will see you guys after the holidays.